Okay, let's jump right into it. Welcome to the deep dive, where you bring us the sources and we help you quickly get to the heart of what's important. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the world of Clan McNeel, guided by excerpts you shared with us from a book titled Clan McNeel, which is part of the Ancient Clans of Scotland series. You wanted to pull out the core history, traditions, and identity presented in these pages. So, our mission really is to extract the most important insights and details for you, the learner. And, this dive is focused only on what the specific book tells us.
Right, and it's a source clearly steeped in history and pride. It looks like a really detailed look at, well, centuries of a fascinating lineage.
Ready to explore what this book reveals about the McNeils?
Absolutely.
Well,
Let's see what this source lays out.
So, the book starts by setting the stage, explaining the Scottish clan system itself. What exactly was a clan, according to this source?
Well, the book emphasizes it was far more than just, a surname. It was a kinship group rooted in the Gaelic word clan, meaning children. It describes a vibrant community bound by shared identity, tradition, and a really powerful sense of mutual support and loyalty, even extending beyond immediate family ties.
Right. And how did this play out for Clan McNeil, particularly on the remote Isle of Barra?
For the McNeils, yeah, especially the bar line, loyalty to the chief was like the absolute core. This kinship wasn't just social. It was fundamental to survival. The source highlights how they supported each other in daily life, navigating disputes, and crucially for defense in, well, a pretty turbulent world. This bond, the book tells us, connected them across generations and even oceans as they later emigrated.
Across oceans. What about the structure? How was the clan organized?
Okay, so at the very top was the chief, known Gaelic as the Auchdaran. The McNeel of Barra is presented as both the supreme leader and protector, with claims tracing back to ancient Irish kings, ruling from their iconic Keesamole Castle.
Feasible, right.
And below the chief, the book mentions chieftains heading up important branches, like the Gia line. There were also tacksmen.
And for our listener, what was a tacksman exactly?
Ah, yes, the source touches on their role. Tacksmen were essentially leaseholders. They managed sections of the clan's land for the chief and often acted as local leaders. The book also notes cultural roles vital to identity, like the Shanakis.
Shanakis, what were they?
They were the clan's oral historians and storytellers. The book says they were crucial for passing down traditions and lineage, especially before written records were common. Hugely important.
Uh-huh. The source also highlights key symbols of identity.
Right. The book points to the clan crest, showing a rock amidst waves, a powerful symbol of, well, steadfastness. Then there's the motto, Buaid no Bas,
Which means?
victory or death. Pretty stark. And of course the tartan, described with its deep blues, greens, black, and red. These weren't just decorative. The source presents them as vital markers of belonging and a shared past.
So, what was everyday life actually like for the common clanspeople on Barra, according to this book?
Well, the source paints a picture deeply connected to the rugged environment. Life was heavily shaped by the sea, and land centered around fishing, farming, boat building, hard physical work like harvesting kelp, herding livestock, maintaining small crofts. That was central. But the book also emphasizes that it was a life rich in purpose and pride, sustained by community, Gaelic song, music, and the vital tradition of storytelling in the evenings.
Okay, now let's turn to where the book says the McNeils actually came from, their origins.
Right, this is where the source reveals a fascinating blend of origins. The name itself, MacNeil, means son of Niall, connecting them to Neil no Gaelach, a legendary 5th century high king of Ireland. One traditional story in the book traces their lineage through Anrothan, an Irish prince who migrated to Scotland around the 11th century, tying them into the ancient Gaelic kingdom of Dalriada in the west of Scotland.
But there's a significant twist the book mentions, right? Something more recent.
Absolutely, and this is crucial. The source notes that modern Y-DNA evidence complicates this purely Irish origin story. It shows that many McNeils, especially those from Barra, have predominantly Norse or Viking ancestry.
So the source isn't presenting a simple origin, but a blended one, Norse and Irish.
Precisely. The book highlights this duality. There are heraldic symbols reflected too. You see the Irish red hand of Ulster alongside a Norse-style galley, a seafaring longboat. The name honors the Irish connection to Niall, while the iconography and, well, the DNA speak to this significant Norse element. The McNeils, according to the source, truly embraced this dual heritage.
How did they first appear in the formal historical record, then?
The book tells us they first step into the written record in 1427. This is when Gillian and McNeel received a charter for Barra from the powerful Lord of the Isles, solidifying their legal claim. However, the source also gives weight to older oral traditions, placing them on Barra centuries earlier. There's talk of a Neil McNeel supposedly attending the Council of the Isles in 1252 and even fighting at the Battle of Largs in 1263 against the Norse.
So the written record starts later than their presence is believed to be.
Yes, exactly. The source suggests Neil McNeel, likely the fifth chief in the mid-1200s, was probably the first properly historical chief. His son, Neil Og, is credited in the book with supporting Robert de Bruce and being rewarded with lands. But securing the formal title through that 1427 charter was a critical step in their rise under the Lords of the Isles.
The book notes they later fractured into different branches.
They did. After the Lordship of the Isles collapsed, the clans split into major branches, notably the Barra line, who allied with the MacLeans, and the Gia line, who sided with the MacDonalds. This internal division became, well, pretty significant in later feuds.
And the source points out a particularly infamous chief in their history.
Ah, yes. Ruari the Turbulent McNeel, the 15th chief. He's certainly highlighted. The book recounts his reputation for piracy in the late 16th, early 17th century, which led to his eventual capture in 1610. His story, the source kind of implies, symbolizes the challenges and the eventual waning of the clan's independent power as the authority of the Scottish crown grew stronger.
How did the clan adapt to these changing times over centuries? Did they just fade away?
No, the book describes them as remarkably adaptable, actually. They evolved from those early Gaelic Norse roots, integrated into the feudal system under the Lords of the Isles, and then later sought charters directly from the crown. Chiefs like Neil Og served the crown, and Roderick Dhu received a crown charter in 1688, making Barra a formal barony. While they did support the Jacobite risings, their overall influence declined after 1745. The source calls the sale of Barra in 1838 a tragic loss of ancestral land, but it also notes the enduring legacy of resilience and that dual heritage carried on.
Okay, here's where the book gets really interesting, detailing the McNeel lands and where they held power. Where was their primary center?
The undisputed historic heart was the Isle of Barra itself. The source confirms it was their seat for centuries, formally granted by that pivotal 1427 charter, and the literal stronghold was Kisimul Castle, sitting right there in Castle Bay.
Did they hold other lands besides Barra, important ones?
Yes, Boisdale on South Uist was a significant holding, also included in the 1427 charter. However, the book notes they lost it to the Clan Ranald MacDonalds by 1601. They also had intermittent control over the small Bishop's Isles to the south of Barr Islands, like Mingulay, Berneray, Pabay, and Vadersay. Used seasonally for fishing and grazing, Mingulay, the largest, was inhabited until the early 20th century, the source says.
And the castles? Kisimul is the famous one, obviously, but were there others mentioned?
Kisimul Castle is certainly the most iconic. The force describes it as the, well, seemingly impenetrable seat of the Barra chiefs, built out on a rock in the bay, symbolizing their naval power. The book touches on its history, its period of ruin, and its remarkable restoration by Chief Robert Lister McNeel in the 20th century.
And the lease of Kisimul is a legendary story, isn't it?
Yeah.
That deal.
It truly is. The source highlights the arrangement where Chief Robert Lister McNeel leased it to historic Scotland back in 2001 for 1,000 years. The cost, just £1 and a bottle of Talisker whiskey per year.
Incredible.
Yeah, the book rightly calls it possibly the world's classiest rent agreement.
Any other castle sites the book mentions?
The source mentions other properties associated with different branches. The Colonsay branch had Colonsay House, built near older fort site. Tainish House in Argyll was linked to that line, and Ugadale House in Kintyre was a local seat for a lesser branch of the clan. But this raises an important question. Why did their landholdings seem so, well, precarious, with lands being lost over time?
Yeah, the book seems to attribute this pattern of losing lands like Boisdale and eventually Barr itself to the turbulent periods they lived through. It points to bitter feuds with powerful neighbors like the Campbells and MacDonalds, and also the increasing centralization of power by the crown. The McNeils were often caught in the middle, weren't they?
Exactly. But the source does note that resilience you mentioned earlier.
It does. It details how Chief Robert Lister McNeel managed to repurchase much of Barra in the 20th century and restore Kisimul, though most of the land is now held for community use, transferred to the Scottish government. So while ancestral lands were lost, the connection, it seems, endured. The book goes on to identify different branches of the clan.
Yes, it clarifies the main divisions. You have the McNeils of Barra, who are the chiefly line, then the McNeils of Gia and later Colonsay, described as a significant cadet or junior branch. Interestingly, they sometimes claimed an older lineage than the Bara chiefs. There were also the McNeils of Tainish, descended from the Giga line, and the McNeils of Ugadale and Kintyre, a smaller branch whose history is apparently remembered in music.
The source also lists associated names, often called septs. What does that signify in the context of a clan? What does the book say?
Well, the book explains that a sept is a family name connected to a clan, but not necessarily by direct chiefly blood. It could be through marriage, holding land from the chief, or simply regional allegiance. These connections were vital for extending the clan's network and influence, particularly as people emigrated, spreading the clan's reach.
And the specific names this book associates with Clan McNeel.
The main name is, of course, McNeil or McNeel, with various spellings.
Hmm?
The source lists others, including Gilionan, Magugin, and importantly, McGuinness or McGuinness. They're described as a distinct but closely related family historically found on Bara. It also notes McGeehan, Johnson, or McGeehan, used by some early members in Argyll, patronymic names like Neil, Neil, or Nielsen, and McGinley, specifically linked to the Colonsay branch. The book states these names were formally recognized over time as associated with the clan.
Okay. Beyond names and lands, the source dedicates sections to the visual symbols, the motto, the tartans, and even the folklore and supernatural side of the McNeils. Let's start with symbols beyond the crust.
Right. The book lists the plant badge, which is the mountain avens, a small white flower native to Bara, symbolizing purity and perseverance. It also gives a detailed breakdown of the chief's heraldic arms. These are like a visual history, really. They're quartered with symbols. A lion for loyalty, the castle on waves representing Kisimul, a galley for their seafaring strength, and the red hand of Ulster and Fetters referencing their Irish ancestry through Nile. The source says these arms basically narrate the clan's unique story.
Is there specific clan music mentioned in the book?
Yes, the clan pipe tune is Kishmul's Galley, or Berlin Bara. The book describes it as a beloved Gaelic air celebrating the chief's return to Bara. Other tunes like McNeel of Bara's March and the McNeils of Ugadale are also noted.
That motto, Buido Bos, victory or death, the book really emphasizes it. What makes it so significant according to the source?
Well, the source highlights that it's not just the official motto, which is common enough, but also, uniquely for Scottish clans, their actual battle cry. It perfectly captures the clan's fierce, uncompromising spirit and martial history. It's presented as a statement of independence and a sense of sacred duty, particularly for the Bar and Gia lines, implying that the cause was more important than personal survival.
Wow.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is how that single phrase bridges the formal identity on the crest with the visceral reality of battle. It's a potent distillation of their history.
The book also takes us into the more mysterious world of clan folklore and supernatural tales. What does it cover?
It does, noting that for many Scottish clans, the line between the earthly and the spiritual or otherworldly was incredibly thin. For the McNeils, this lore is intimately tied to Bara and, predictably, Kisimul Castle.
Like the legend of the Phantom Piper.
Exactly. The source recounts this tale from a 16th century siege. Apparently, a piper's spirit remained after his death to guard Kisimul, his music still said to be heard on stormy nights. The book frames him as a loyal, enduring guardian spirit of the castle.
Spooky. And the Green Lady.
The source describes her as the ghost of a chief's daughter, often appearing in Kisimul, sometimes marked by sorrow, but generally seen as a gentle, protective presence, particularly noted for appearing to children or those lost within the castle walls.
There's a more unsettling spirit associated with the island too, right? The book mentions one.
Yes, the Banshee of Dún Scaravil on Bara's northern point. The book links her to a wailing spirit said to appear as a harbinger when a chief is near death. It even cites an account from 1863 related to a chief dying on the mainland. She's presented as both an elegy and a spectral warning tied to the clan's ancient lineage on the island.
And the source mentions a specific curse on the clan.
It recounts the curse of the Grey Woman of Beanhow from the Isle of Tiree. Following a McNeel raid in the 15th century, a seer cursed them, saying, when McNeel loses what he holds most dear, only then will peace come to Bara. The book makes the intriguing connection that the sale of Bara in 1838, their greatest loss, did seem to be followed by a period of relative calm compared to the earlier turbulent centuries, suggesting maybe the curse was fulfilled.
Interesting connection. The book briefly lists other pieces of lore too.
Yes, just hints, really, at things like the gift of second sight among some Bar McNeils, a sea light from drowned sailors, a mirroring Kisimul said to crack before a chief's death, and a stone of the chief's oath believed to compel truth. It also notes tales of a headless horseman on Vatersay signaling bad news, children vanishing to live with the Sith folk.
The Sith folk being the fairies or supernatural beings in Scottish folklore.
Precisely, yeah. The source also mentions the white boat of the dead as a death omen, the singing rocks where Bard is said to be buried, and a crow on Kissimmel's tower signaling change. Just glimpses into the rich, mystical world embedded in their history, according to the book.
What about tartans? The book seems quite definitive here, doesn't it?
It is very clear. The source explicitly states that Clan McNeel officially recognizes only two tartans. The McNeel of Barra Tartan, which has a dark green and navy base with red and yellow lines, and the McNeel of Colonsay McNeel of Gia Tartan, with a navy and black base and white and yellow stripes. It specifies these were formally approved in 1997 by the chief as the only authentic ones.
Any other versions the book mentions? Or warns against?
Well, the source acknowledges the existence of unofficial dress or weathered versions, but reiterates that the chief endorses only the two official patterns. It specifically cautions against and rejects a red-based tartan, tracing it to a discredited 19th century book called the Vestiarium Scoticum. The book also clarifies that associated families, or septs, like McInnes, McGugan, and Johnson, wear these official McNeel patterns.
Okay. The world of the clans was often marked by conflict, and this book doesn't shy away from the McNeil's feuds and battles. What blood feuds does the source detail?
Yeah, the book describes several key ones. A bitter feud with Clan Campbell over possession of Gia, which the McNeils eventually lost by 1553. There was also a complex relationship and feud with Clan MacDonald. The McNeils found themselves fighting on opposing sides during the larger MacDonald-MacLean conflicts. The Burra McNeils allied with the MacLeans, while the Gia McNeils sided with the MacDonalds. The book says they even faced each other at the Battle of Tre Gruenart in 1598.
Rough. And their neighbors on the Uists.
Yes. The source notes tension and a feud with the Clanranald MacDonalds over Boisdale, which was forcibly taken from the McNeils in 1601. Apparently, the MacDonalds took advantage of Ruari the Turbulence troubles at the time. Ruari himself even had an unusual feud with the Bishop of the Isles, harassing church property and ships, which ultimately contributed to the crown stepping in against him.
So these feuds weren't just personal grudges.
No, not at all. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the source shows these feuds were fundamentally about land, power, and survival in a volatile environment. Clans constantly had to navigate alliances with major forces like the Lords of the Isles and later the Crown. It was high stakes.
The book also mentions painful internal conflict after Ruari the Turbulent, within the clan itself.
Yeah. It does, yeah. Detailing a bitter internal feud over succession between his sons after he was captured, made worse by nephews who actually betrayed him to the Crown. Although his son, Neil Ogg, eventually became chief, the experience fractured the clan, leaving a legacy captured in a stark Barra, saying the book, quote, Barra brotherhood, red cold blood. It adds that a more peaceful rivalry over the chiefship exists today between the Barra and Colonsay lines.
Wow. Okay, the book lists specific battles the McNeils participated in over the centuries.
Yes, it mentions their presence way back at the Battle of Largs in 1263, helping Scotland against the Norse. They fought at Bannockburn in 1314 with Robert the Bruce, where legend, according to the source, says Neil Ogg captured an English standard. They suffered heavy losses supporting the Lord of the Isles at Harlaw in 1411, and even fought on opposing internal sides at the naval battle of Bloody Bay in 1480.
Any later conflicts mentioned?
The source notes involvement in the Battle of the Ensign in 1545, supporting Donald Dube's rebellion against the crown. The previously mentioned raid on Barra around 1602 was essentially a royal expedition to subdue the island because of Ruari's piracy. Later, McNeils fought in the English Civil Wars, serving under Charles II at Worcester in 1651. And they were also Jacobite supporters present at Killiecrankie in 1689 and Sheriff Muir in 1715.
So how did this martial history culminate at the final Jacobite rising, Culloden? What does the book say about their role there?
Well, the book states that by 1745, the clan's overall strength had significantly waned. The chief at the time, Roderick Ogg, did not officially raise the clan to fight for the Jacobites. The source suggests this was likely due to their reduced numbers and the clan's history of past troubles with the crown, maybe a strategic decision.
But individuals still fought.
Yes, that's an interesting point the book makes. While the chief didn't muster the clan, individual McNeils did fight at Culloden, joining other Jacobite regiments like Clan Ranelagh or even the Irish Brigade.
And the chief, Roderick Ogg, wasn't entirely unaffected by the aftermath.
No, the source notes that even though he didn't raise the clan, he was arrested on suspicion by the government after Culloden. It reflects the widespread crackdown on Highland chiefs, regardless of their direct involvement. He was imprisoned for a time, but later released, remaining under surveillance.
The book calls Culloden a symbolic end to their warrior era.
It does. The source states that after Culloden, the McNeils never mustered under arms as a clan again. However, it emphasizes that the McNeel name is still remembered at Culloden memorials, honoring those who did fight individually. And their martial legacy, tied to that motto, endures.
Finally, the source includes a section of truly unique facts about the clan. Let's look at some of the gems it pulls out. These sound fun.
They are. My favorite is the rather grand, and the source says, slightly comedic, McNeel has dined. Ritual at Kissimmee. The story is that the chief's piper would sound a call, announcing that the chief had finished eating, thereby giving permission for the potentates of the world to dine.
That's brilliant.
It's a wonderful mix of island independence and bombast.
And that folklore claim about Noah's Ark.
Ah, yes, the cheeky tale that when Noah was gathering creatures for the ark, the McNeils told him essentially, "Don't worry about us, we have our own boat." The source presents it as a bold piece of folklore asserting their legendary self-sufficiency.
Love it. The Kissimmee Castle lease story is definitely unique, too.
It absolutely is. The source confirms the details. The 2001 lease to historic Scotland for a millennium, costing just £1 and that single bottle of Talisker whiskey per year. The book stands by its assessment that it's likely the world's classiest rent agreement.
The story of Ruweri, the turbulence betrayal, sounds particularly stark, though.
It is very grim. The source recounts how he was betrayed to the king by his own nephews in 1609. The book notes that these nephews are said to have died in disgrace, cursed in clan legend for their betrayal of kin.
And the example of the American Revolution patriot spirits, what was that?
That's a great one, highlighting the adaptability of that clan spirit, maybe. The source tells of McNeel immigrants in North Carolina who, during the Revolution, captured a British ship while flying a rebel flag. The book dryly observes they were considered pirates by the Crown, but patriots by the colonies, a salty, perhaps very McNeel, flip of loyalty.
The detail about the Bar McNeil's band is a fun touch, connecting to today.
It is. It connects the history right to the present. The source mentions this real-life group of descendants in Nova Scotia, keeping the Highland harmonies and family pride alive globally, even touring with a tartan-clad bus, fiddles and all.
And the sheer density of the name on Barra today.
Yeah, the book highlights that McNeel is still by far the most common surname on the island. It conjures the image that if you shout McNeel on Barra, half the island might turn around, like a village-sized extended family reunion.
So what does this all mean? How did a clan rooted on a remote island reach so far beyond Scotland? The diaspora.
Right. The book dedicates a section to the diaspora, detailing the waves of emigration. It notes a significant early group in 1802, when 75 families sailed to Nova Scotia, driven by hardship and the threat of the clearances. Hundreds more followed in the 19th century after the tragic sale and clearance of Barra, heading primarily to Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and Ontario. The source says they carry their Gaelic language, Catholic faith, and strong clan identity, helping to establish enduring Scottish communities in Canada's Maritimes.
And the United States.
McNeils also settled in North Carolina from the 1790s. The book even points to their involvement in the American Civil War, with individuals fighting on both sides like Colonel Angus McNeel for the Confederacy and Captain John McNeel of the Fighting 69th Irish Brigade for the Union.
So they maintain that identity even across conflicts like that.
Well, what's fascinating here is how, according to the source, that core clan identity persisted and could even manifest in loyalty to entirely new nations and causes, whether it was the American Revolution or the Civil War. It's quite something.
The diaspora reached even further, according to the book, beyond North America.
Yes, it mentions migration to Australia, starting around 1852 in Victoria, and to New Zealand, including descendants of the Colonsay line and even whalers on Stewart Island. The book notes that Highland games and tartan gatherings remain important ways for these global communities to connect. And perhaps unexpectedly, the name appears even in the Caribbean and West Africa, particularly Jamaica, linked through colonial history. The source truly portrays the clan's reach as global.
The book also highlights how McNeils connect today, doesn't it? Through societies.
It does. It lists several active Clan McNeil societies, all sanctioned by the chief. There's the Clan McNeil Association of America, CMAA, Clan McNeil in Canada, and the Clan McNeil of Gia and Colonsay Association, primarily based in the UK and New Zealand. The source explains that these groups are vital for connecting members, supporting culture and genealogy, and organizing events like clan gatherings and Highland games, keeping the connection alive.
And for listeners interested in going deeper, the book points to resources, I assume.
Yes, it includes a suggested further reading section. It lists various books and articles, from concise history specifically on McNeel of Bara to more academic studies and older accounts. It also points to primary sources, like charters held at the National Records of Scotland. So the source demonstrates there's a wealth of material available for further exploration, much of which this book clearly drew upon directly.
Wow, what a journey through the world of Clan McNeel, directly guided by the details and stories within the pages of this book. From those layered origins combining Gaelic kings and Norse seafarers, through centuries of feuds, battles, ghosts guarding castles, and then spreading across the globe. There's just so much packed into this history.
It's truly compelling to see, as this source presents it, how an identity forged in a place as unique as the Isle of Barra could endure through immense challenges, conflict, loss of land, forced immigration, yet remain rooted in that shared heritage and story. It's quite remarkable.
You, the learner, have now gained a thorough overview of Clan McNeel, hitting on their core identity, leadership, lands, those iconic symbols and tartans, the vibrant folklore, their key feuds and battles, their presence, or lack thereof, at Culloden, and how that legacy continues through the diaspora and modern societies.
And remember, we focused only on extracting the insights and specific details provided in the excerpts from this particular book that you shared with us.
And speaking of this book, our sources explicitly identify as being part of the Ancient Clans of Scotland series. If this deep dive has sparked your interest, exploring the book itself could be a wonderful next step. It sounds like a really rich resource.
Indeed. Works like this series play a vital role in preserving these rich, often complex, clan histories. And, it would make a fantastic gift for anyone with a connection to Clan McNeel, or just a passion for Scottish history and heritage.
Definitely. And you can find a link to buy the book directly in the description for this deep dive. Makes it easy if you're interested.
As we wrap up, maybe consider this provocative thought building on their famous motto. How does the enduring spirit of Boyd no Boss, victory or death, translate or manifest itself in the resilience, the determination, or maybe just the sense of identity held by McNeils today, both in Scotland and across that vast global diaspora? Something to think about.
Great question. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.